On the third day of his hike, Gary Hinge smelled smoke. He was alone in northern Nevada, miles from any road, walking through a dry expanse of gray rock and low brush. The day was fading. Out there, smoke might mean a campfire or other hikers nearby. Gary left his route and went looking for the source. The cabin stood beyond a line of rocks. It was a low structure made from dark, weathered boards, with a roof that looked close to collapsing. Nothing around it explained why anyone had built it there. There was no track, no vehicle, no abandoned equipment. Yet a thin ribbon of smoke rose from the chimney. Gary kept his distance. He watched the door and windows, waiting for someone to appear. The light continued to fade. No one came outside. In the video he posted after returning home, Gary still struggled to explain what had frightened him. He had heard no threat and seen no face at the windows. He only knew that he should not go any closer. He left before dark and pitched his tent several miles away. In the morning, barefoot tracks surrounded the campsite. They came up to the tent, circled it slowly, then headed back toward the rocks. Gary followed them for a short distance. The tracks vanished on hard ground. He packed his gear and returned to his truck, looking over his shoulder all the way back. Gary told this story online under the name Scorpion Sam. For years, he had posted videos about his hikes, and almost 50,000 people followed his channel. He was not a thrill seeker. Most of his videos covered routes, equipment, and long walks through country where he could spend days without meeting another person. He spoke quietly, understood the dangers of the desert, and carried little because he knew exactly what he needed. Gary often left the trails, slept in the open, and came home with enough footage to retrace his route. He had no interest in setting records. He was drawn to abandoned places, difficult terrain, and the kind of silence found only hours beyond the nearest road. After he disappeared, that experience gave his family some reason to hope he would make his own way home. Gary could lose his bearings, fall, or run out of water like anyone else, but he never wandered into the desert unprepared. He planned his trips and always gave someone an expected return date. His family had no idea how large his online following had become. To them, Gary was a private man who preferred being outdoors. Online, thousands of strangers waited for every new trip. The cabin video was unlike anything else on his channel. Gary sat at home, facing the camera. He had no footage from the hike. All he could offer was his account of the smoke, the cabin in the middle of nowhere, and the barefoot tracks around his tent. The first comments demanded proof. Why had he not taken out his camera? Where was the cabin? How could someone who filmed almost every hike come back without a single picture? Some viewers decided Gary had invented the story. Others demanded the coordinates so they could investigate for themselves. Gary refused. The terrain was dangerous, and he did not want curious strangers wandering into an area filled with ravines and abandoned mine shafts. He was not even sure he could find the place again. The messages kept coming. People told him to repeat the hike, film the smoke, and go inside the cabin. As the days passed, requests turned into accusations. Eventually, Gary posted one last video. He looked worn down by the argument. Again, he said he would not reveal the location, but he would return. This time, he would carry a camera and a gun. If he found the cabin, everyone would finally see what he had seen. There was nothing showy about the announcement. Gary did not smile, tease a release date, or try to build excitement. He wanted to end the accusations and move on. Before leaving, he told his roommate Simon when he expected to be back, but not exactly where he was going. Gary often kept routes private when he wanted to protect a place. 2 days after the agreed return date, Simon called Gary's sister, Beverly. By then, more than a week had passed since Gary left home. The first searches focused on the last known location of his phone. Police officers, park rangers, and volunteers covered the tracks of northern Nevada. The July heat was already cutting into his chances of survival. Gary knew how to look after himself, but he traveled light. If he was hurt at the bottom of a ravine or had fallen into an old mine opening, a search team could pass within yards of him and never know. His truck was eventually found almost 55 miles from Ruth, at the end of a dirt road. It was parked beneath a small hill. The vehicle was undamaged and appeared to be in working order. Inside, investigators found numerous fingerprints that did not belong to Gary. Several were on the steering wheel. Outside, a trail of footprints led away from the truck. Whoever made them had been barefoot. They did not match Gary, and they disappeared when they reached the rocky ground. The search shifted to the new area. Teams crossed it on foot, while helicopters and drones surveyed the surrounding valleys. They found no tent, clothing, or remains of a fire. Nothing in the area led to the cabin described on Scorpion Sam's channel. They also checked the excavations marked in the region. Some mines had been sealed, others still opened at ground level beneath the brush. Any one of them could have hidden Gary from view, but none held a trace of him. The fingerprints from the truck matched no known record. Investigators could not tell when they had been left. Even so, the prints on the wheels suggested that Gary might not have been the last person to drive his vehicle. When the official search began to slow, Beverly hired a private investigator. A local reporter went through Scorpion Sam's videos one by one. She searched for a ridge, a road sign, or a mountain profile that might reveal his route. Gary had carefully kept useful landmarks out of frame. Even the town he had started from remained uncertain. Gary's efforts to protect the location were now hampering the search. He kept roads out of frame. His descriptions were vague. He had never given the cabin's coordinates to anyone. After several weeks, the official search ended. Distances in that part of Nevada are immense, and one dirt track can look much like another. Without a new lead, there was nowhere specific left to search. A group of hikers were camping in White Pine County, far from the place where the truck had been found. When they woke, a backpack was lying near their tents. They were certain it had not been there the night before. The bag belonged to Gary. His identification and several personal items were still inside. So was the camera he had taken back to the cabin. Police never released the photographs taken that morning. The report states only that the camera was still clutched in Gary's hand. The rest of his body was not in the bag. Forensic tests showed that the hand had been severed while Gary was still alive. They could not determine how long he survived or who carried the backpack to the campsite. Nor could they explain how that person came close enough to leave it beside the tents and walk away without waking anyone. Someone else had reached Gary and later carried the bag out of the desert. Why bring the camera back? The backpack had been left where it would be discovered that morning, with the device intact and its contents untouched. The memory card was still inside. It held the last footage Gary ever recorded. The first clip was filmed at dusk. Gary holds the camera in front of him as he walks. His face is dusty, but his voice remains steady. He says he has been traveling for a day and a half and recognizes the terrain. Minutes later, he shows one of the markers left during his first visit, a strip of fabric tied to a dead branch. He turns the camera toward the landscape. Low hills roll away beneath the orange evening light. No building, power line, or trail crosses the frame. Gary lets the shot run long enough to show how far he is from help. The cabin is still out of sight. Gary says it lies beyond another series of hills, then stops recording to save the battery. When the camera comes on again, night has fallen. Gary is now filming in infrared. The ground appears pale, almost white, while the sky has vanished into a solid field of black. Stones roll beneath his boots. The microphone catches his breathing, the scrape of his pack, and occasional gusts of wind moving over the ridge. The footage is not continuous. Gary records for a few minutes, stops, then begins again farther along. The landscape looks identical after every cut. Only Gary has changed. His voice is lower, and he no longer comments on the route. One gap between the recordings is much longer than the rest. He moves slowly and stops often to listen. At first, there is nothing but the sound of Gary himself. Then, something emerges far ahead. It is too faint to understand, and returns at irregular intervals. Gary first mistakes it for the wind. After a few seconds, a voice begins to separate from the noise. Someone is singing. The tune is short and repetitive. The words cannot be made out. The voice rises and falls strangely, as though it were passing through damaged equipment. Gary stops walking. The singing continues for several seconds, then cuts out. He whispers that he can smell smoke. The smell tells him he has found the right area. The fear that drove him away on his first visit returns at once. This time, Gary does not turn back. He checks that his gun is within reach and continues, aiming the camera at the ground so he will not stumble. Another marker appears in the infrared light. A second follows. Gary climbs the final slope in a crouch. At the top, he slowly raises the camera. The cabin is there. It almost disappears against the rocks. Part of the roof has collapsed, and the wall boards run at uneven angles. Pale smoke still rises from the chimney and disappears into the night. Gary does not move for almost a minute. The door is closed. No light shows through the openings. The singing has stopped, but a fire is still burning inside. He could still leave without being seen. For a moment, the camera points back toward the way he came. Then Gary turns it toward the cabin again. He has walked for a day and a half to capture this image, and now it is in front of him. Gary zooms in on a window. Static crawls across the picture. Behind the glass, there is only a dark room and the gray reflection of the ground. He pans toward the chimney, then along the side of the cabin. Something moves beside the wall. The movement is so brief that it could be a glitch in the image. Gary brings the lens back. A shape is standing at the corner of the building, almost completely hidden. It is the size of a man. Gary lowers the camera. His breathing quickens. He begins to step backwards, placing each foot carefully. The ground is covered with loose stones. One shifts beneath his boot. The figure turns its head. For several seconds, it does nothing. The camera picks out a thin body, oversized clothing, and a pale face whose features blur in the infrared light. Then it steps away from the wall and starts toward Gary. Gary runs. The image jumps between the ground and the sky. The cabin disappears behind the rocks. Gary stumbles, catches himself, and keeps going without stopping the recording. The microphone picks up no clear footsteps behind him. After several dozen yards, he stops and looks back. The slope is empty. He holds the camera on the path behind him. The microphone records his breathing. Then, the singing begins again, much closer now, repeating the same broken melody. A figure crosses the frame. Gary raises his gun. The shot overwhelms the microphone and lights the rocks for an instant. The camera falls sideways. For several seconds, it records nothing but a bush and a patch of white ground. Gary picks it up and runs. He does not know whether he hit the figure. Nothing moves behind him. The singing has stopped. He finds a hollow between two rocks and crouches inside. The lens remains fixed on the opening. Gary tries to slow his breathing, but the microphone catches every movement. 1 minute passes, then another. Something appears at the edge of the frame. First, a hand rests on the rock. Then a face leans into the opening only a few yards away. Part of it seems to be covered in cloth. The rest is too distorted by the infrared light and interference to describe with any certainty. One eye reflects the camera's glow. Gary pulls back. The figure disappears. He waits without speaking. The picture trembles in his hands. When he finally leaves the hollow, he sweeps the camera across the surrounding rocks. The passage is empty. Gary takes 2 steps. The face suddenly fills the lens. The camera jerks sideways. Gary screams. Then the device strikes the stone. The recording continues from the ground for several seconds. A leg passes in front of the lens. After a second impact, the footage ends. Investigators isolated the final frame in which the face is visible. They brightened it, enlarged it, and compared it with missing person records. No match was found. What appears to be a deformity could come from the night vision, movement, clothing, or an actual injury. The footage does not provide an answer. Gary Hinge's body has never been found. Neither has the cabin. It lies somewhere in Nevada's high desert, but Gary had removed anything from his videos that might reveal the route. None of the markers on the memory card has ever been identified. Someone still knew the way out. That person left the region with Gary's backpack, reached a campsite where people were sleeping, and placed it within yards of their tents. The memory card remained inside the camera. To this day, the only person ever linked to the cabin is the figure Gary recorded that night.